Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. I learned this lesson in the most brutal way possible when my own father tried to burn my 8-year-old son alive. My name is Sarah, and I used to be the kind of person who believed that family was everything. I was naive, I was weak, I was wrong. For 32 years, I had been the scapegoat of my family. My father, Richard, a successful businessman who valued reputation above all else, had never hidden his disappointment in having me as his firstborn. My mother, Eleanor, a cold woman obsessed with maintaining the perfect facade, had always treated me like an inconvenience. My younger sister, Jessica, the golden child, had made it her mission to remind me of my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. When I got pregnant with Ethan at 24, unmarried and struggling, their disappointment reached new heights. "You've brought shame to this family," my father had said. My mother simply turned her back on me. Jessica laughed and said I was finally living down to their expectations. The years that followed were a careful dance of humiliation and hope. Every family gathering was an exercise in endurance. Richard would make cutting remarks about my single motherhood. Eleanor would criticize everything about Ethan. Jessica, now married to spineless Jake, had turned cruelty into an art form. I endured it all because I kept hoping that someday they would accept us. I kept believing that, underneath the cruelty, there was still family love waiting to emerge. Ethan began to notice when he turned 6. "Mommy, why don't Grandpa and Grandma like me?" The question broke my heart because I had no good answer. I should have stopped going to family events then. But I was still trapped in that cycle of hope and desperation, still believing that if I just tried hard enough, they would finally accept us. The breaking point came on a sweltering Saturday in July. Richard and Eleanor were hosting one of their famous backyard barbecues, inviting all their wealthy friends to admire their perfect life. "Oh, Sarah's here," Eleanor announced when we arrived. "I hope this time your boy doesn't ruin the atmosphere for everyone else." Richard appeared beside us. "The boy looks weak, needs to toughen up if he's ever going to amount to anything." Jessica was holding court with friends when she saw us. Well, 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 look who decided to grace us with their presence. The family disappointment and her little mistake. The laughter that followed cut deep. These people were laughing at my sweet, innocent Ethan like he was some kind of joke. Jessica picked up a ball and called out to Ethan, "Want to play catch with Aunt Jessica?" Against my better judgment, I let him try. What happened next unfolded like a nightmare. Ethan ran toward Jessica with anticipation. She threw the ball deliberately over his head, far out of reach, then burst into cruel laughter. "Oops, guess you're not fast enough, little man." Ethan ran after the ball anyway. As he passed Richard, who was standing near the fire pit, my father did something that changed everything. He stuck out his foot, deliberately, maliciously. With full intent to hurt my child, Ethan went flying toward the open flames. Time slowed as I launched myself across the yard, reaching him just as his shirt began to smoke. I pulled him away from the fire, my hands shaking as I checked for burns. His shirt was singed, and there was a red mark on his arm. But it was the sound that followed that shattered my world. Laughter. My father was laughing. My mother was laughing. Jessica was cackling with glee. "Oops!" Richard called out with false innocence. "Sorry, I thought that was a rock. Maybe the boy will learn to watch where he's going now." Eleanor's laughter was like ice. Well, that's one way to liven up the party. Jessica was actually clapping. "Perfect aim, Dad?" That little brat needed to learn some coordination anyway. The other guests showed uncomfortable chuckles, people looking away, some recording on their phones. Nobody helped. Nobody stood up for my son. In that moment, holding my trembling child while my family laughed at his pain, something inside me died. But something else was born. Something hard and cold and absolutely furious. I didn't say a word. I picked up Ethan and walked away, ignoring their continued laughter. "Running away again, Sarah?" Jessica called out. "Some things never change." I drove home in silence, helped Ethan into bed, and held him until he fell asleep. Then I sat in my living room until dawn, my mind working furiously. For the first time in my life, I wasn't making excuses for their behavior. I was planning. My phone buzzed with messages from Jessica throughout the night. Pictures from the party, showing everyone having fun without us. "Too bad you had to make such a scene. We actually had fun once you left." I screenshot every message, every piece of evidence. The next morning, I called Matt Rodriguez, my college friend who was now an investigative journalist. When I told him what happened and showed him the evidence, his face went pale. "Sarah, this is child abuse. You need to go to the police." "I will," I said, "but first I want to make sure the whole world sees exactly who they really are." Matt stared at me for a long moment. "You want to destroy them?" "I want to protect my son, and if that means destroying them, then yes." What followed were 2 weeks of intensive investigation. Matt tracked down other guests from the party, and we discovered several had recorded the incident. One Instagram video clearly showed Richard deliberately kicking Ethan toward the fire pit, complete with my son's scream, Richard's fake "oops," and the laughter that followed. We found Jessica's group chat messages where she bragged to friends. Dad taught that little brat a lesson today. Funniest thing I've seen in months. Other family members came forward with stories of abuse and cruelty. A pattern emerged of a family terrorizing anyone they perceived as weak for decades. While we worked, Richard, Eleanor, and Jessica continued their lives as if nothing had happened. Eleanor posted charity photos on social media. Richard gave business interviews. Jessica shared lifestyle content, playing the perfect daughter. They had no idea what was coming. The opportunity came with their annual Sunday dinner party, their biggest event of the year. The guest list included business associates, charity board members, politicians, and society figures. They invited me to maintain their perfect family image. I accepted. On the day of the party, I dressed carefully in my best outfit. Ethan wore his nicest clothes, and for the first time in weeks, seemed excited. Maybe they'll be nicer this time. Mommy, he said hopefully. The house was full of elegant guests when we arrived. Richard and Eleanor played gracious hosts to perfection, greeting us with false warmth for their audience. Dinner was served on finest china, with expensive wine. I sat quietly in my usual role while the conversation flowed around business and society topics. During dessert, I made my move. "Excuse me," I said, standing up. All eyes turned to me. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something I think everyone should see." Richard's face darkened. "Sarah, what are you doing?" I connected my phone to their smart television. The large screen flickered to life. "I want to show everyone a video from a recent family gathering. I think it's important that you all see the real Richard and Eleanor Fitzgerald." The video began playing. There was Ethan running toward Jessica. There was Richard deliberately sticking out his foot. There was my baby flying toward the fire, his scream echoing through their elegant dining room. Then came the laughter. Richard's cruel chuckle, Eleanor's ice-cold giggling, Jessica's gleeful cackling, all playing at full volume for their horrified guests. The room erupted in gasps. Someone dropped their wine glass. "Turn it off!" Eleanor shrieked, lunging toward the television. The next video showed Jessica's group chat messages enlarged for everyone to read. "Dad taught that little brat a lesson today. Funniest thing I've seen in months." Richard stood violently, his chair falling over. "How dare you humiliate us in our own home?" "I'm not humiliating you," I said calmly. "You did that to yourselves. I'm just making sure everyone knows who you really are." The room went deadly quiet except for Eleanor's sobbing and Jessica's frantic denials. "It was just a joke! Just a stupid joke!" But no one was listening. They were staring at the evidence of what this family had done to a child. That's when Detective Miller walked in. Matt had arranged for him to be there, had shown him all our evidence. Miller was a father himself, and the videos had filled him with controlled fury. "Richard Fitzgerald, Eleanor Fitzgerald, Jessica Hendricks, you're all under arrest for child endangerment and conspiracy to commit assault." Chaos erupted. Richard blustered about lawsuits. Eleanor collapsed into dramatic sobs. Jessica screamed about betrayal and lies. But their guests had seen the evidence. They had watched a grown man deliberately hurt a child and laugh about it. As the handcuffs clicked into place, I picked up Ethan and walked toward the door. But first, I stopped in front of Richard. "You want to know the difference between us?" I said quietly. "I would die before I let anyone hurt my child. You tried to kill yours for entertainment." I turned to address the shocked guests, many already recording this meltdown. For 32 years, I believed that family meant something. But family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and protection. And these people are not my family. They never were. Ethan and I walked out for the last time, leaving behind the chaos and years of pain. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Matt's article went viral within hours. The story became a national scandal. Justice for Ethan began trending, with thousands sharing their own stories of family abuse. Richard lost his job within days. Eleanor was removed from charity boards. Jessica and Jake became social pariahs, their friends abandoning them as their cruelty became public knowledge. Their perfect facade crumbled completely. For decades, they had maintained respectability as pillars of the community. Now everyone knew the truth. They tried to fight back. Richard hired expensive lawyers claiming the video was out of context. Eleanor gave tearful interviews claiming to be the real victim. Jessica started a social media campaign painting herself as misunderstood. Nobody believed them. The evidence was too clear, too damning. 6 months later, Richard pleaded guilty to child endangerment, accepting community service and anger management. Eleanor and Jessica received counseling and probation. Most importantly, they were required to stay away from Ethan and me. The restraining order was granted without question. Ethan and I moved to a small apartment we could afford on our own. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and peaceful. For the first time in 8 years, my son could play without fear. For the first time in 32 years, I could breathe. The support from strangers was overwhelming. People sent cards offering encouragement. A therapy center offered free counseling. A women's support group welcomed me, teaching me to recognize and heal from emotional abuse. I started seeing a therapist, working through decades of conditioning that taught me to accept mistreatment as normal. I had to learn to love myself before I could teach my son to do the same. A year after that terrible barbecue, Ethan and I drove to the beach for a weekend getaway. As we walked along the shore, Ethan ran ahead to chase waves, his laughter carried by ocean breeze. He looked so different from the scared, anxious child he had been. "Mommy?" he called back. "Look at this shell I found." I admired his perfect conch shell as he looked up at me with bright, trusting eyes. "Are you happy now, Mommy?" he asked. For so many years, happiness had seemed foreign, something other people experienced, but not something I deserved. But looking at my son's face, breathing salt air, feeling warm sun, I realized that yes, I was happy. "I am, sweetheart," I said, pulling him close. "I really truly am." And for the first time in my life, I meant it. The people who were supposed to love us had tried to destroy us, but they failed. Instead of breaking us, their cruelty forged us into something stronger. We had walked through fire and emerged, not just unburned, but purified. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. Sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from people incapable of loving you back. Sometimes you have to save yourself and those who matter most, even if it means burning bridges with people who share your DNA. Family isn't about blood or obligation or appearances. It's about love, respect, protection, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Richard, Eleanor, and Jessica had never been my family in any way that mattered. They had been my tormentors, my oppressors, my deepest wound. Now I knew better. The family that matters is the one you choose, the one you build, the one you nurture with intention and care. Ethan and I had each other, and we had built a community of chosen family around us. Matt, Detective Miller, our therapists, neighbors, support group members, this was our real family. As the sun set over the ocean, Ethan and I built sandcastles together. Each castle represented a dream, a hope for the future, a possibility that had seemed impossible just a year ago. We were free, we were safe, we were loved. The flames of hatred had burned away everything false and toxic in our lives, leaving only what was real and true and worth protecting. Sometimes you have to let everything burn to make room for something better to grow. Sometimes destruction is the first step toward creation. Sometimes walking through fire is the only way to find your way home.